Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to the 22nd Annual Vermont Employee Ownership Conference. I want to echo the huge thanks to the staff and volunteers who make this happen, and also, our 2024 sponsors. Financially, it makes it possible both for us to do this event and to make sure that the event is accessible to everyone who's interested in this topic. So that's a huge, important piece of the puzzle. So I'd like to share before we get to the keynote talk today, just a few updates about what has been going on in the employee ownership world in Vermont and a little bit nationally. And we'll also hear a little bit from folks from the offices of our state representatives sharing kind of their thoughts on employee ownership. So we continue to see a strong amount of interest and movement with employee ownership. When the pandemic happened, there was a little bit of a freeze-up as everyone was kind of trying to figure out what was going on. And then there was this kind of huge burst of interest where we probably had twice the number of conversations with new business owners as we had in the past. That's settled down a little bit, but the number of folks, the kind of theme for the last year has been folks who've been thinking about it for a long time starting to step up to the table. There's one company that looks like it'll be closing in the next year, where our founder, Don Jameson, had his first conversation with them the first year that this conference happened. So there can be quite a long sales cycle sometimes for employee ownership, but when folks are ready, they're ready, and we're really excited to see a number of new companies coming into play. The other thing I want to highlight, and this will sort of lead into our legislative folks, is that there's some really kind of interesting and powerful policy stuff happening that we're very hopeful will have an impact on employee ownership in Vermont. One is for folks in the room who are on the ESOP side of things. This year is the golden anniversary of not having valuation guidance that's finalized from the Department of Labor. It's been 50 years, since 1974. There's now legislation that's been passed that's telling them to finally do the job, and the deadlines do keep flying by, but I know the ESOP Association is on it, and hopefully we'll be seeing that finalized soon. That'll be a big moment. Second thing is the Work Act, which has been proposed for many years, would provide, was passed, and now there's a discussion about its funding. Our hope is that it will be funded, both in terms of it providing potentially some expansion to our capacity, but also for many neighboring states that don't have state employee ownership centers. It would allow for places like New Hampshire, upstate New York, Maine, other places to really kind of have the additional support to allow for employee ownership to be on the menu and flourish in their community. So we're really hopeful about that. A third thing is the Employee Equity Investment Act. This is a bill that would create new forms of investment fund that would specifically be focused on employee ownership. We've been having conversations to lay the groundwork for something like this in Vermont to make it easier for business owners to say yes to employee ownership when the time comes, because the financing is better and more clear. And finally, recently introduced was the National Worker Cooperative Development and Support Act, which would both address some issues at the federal level around financing for worker cooperatives and also create kind of some interagency collaboration that would make kind of clearer supports for that model of employee ownership. So there's a lot that's feeling pretty exciting, and we're hopeful maybe in a year the updates will be that we're starting to see the impact, some of the real impact of some of these things. But we're lucky here in Vermont to have a delegation that has been very strongly supportive of employee ownership in a variety of ways. And so I'd like to welcome the first of our three representatives, James, to the stage with a message from Senator Sanders.
Good morning, everyone. My name is James Paradisus. I work on Senator Sanders' outreach team handling economic issues, little things, right? Thank you, first of all, to the Vermont Employee Ownership Center for inviting me and the Senator to speak to you all today, for all of the important work that you have done over the years to increase employee ownership in America. As many in this crowd already know, we live at a time of growing wealth and income inequality, where just 3 people own as much as the bottom half of this country. There are so many things that Congress and the state of Vermont need to do to reverse the rampant wealth inequality today, and one of the most powerful would be to dramatically increase worker ownership and voice in the workplace. That is why Senator Sanders has been a long-time champion of expanding employee ownership. Study after study has shown that employee ownership creates higher wages, better benefits, and a more secure retirement. Employee ownership also increases employment, sales, and savings, as well as decreases to wealth disparities. This is in large part because employee-owned businesses boost employee morale, dedication, creativity, and productivity as workers share in profits and have more control over their own work lives. Today, nearly 15 million people participate in ESOPs, and these plans paid out $175 billion in benefits in a single year. The Senator Sanders is also proud that Vermont has more worker co-ops per capita than any other state, and is among the top states for ESOPs per capita. That's incredible, but much more must be done to provide access to these plans. I am proud to say that after more than a decade of work by many of you in this room, as well as Senator Sanders, Congress passed the Work Act at the end of 2022, unfortunately without any funding mechanism. We'll get to that. This modest but effective legislation created a division at the Department of Labor to promote employee ownership and will eventually provide grants to state employee ownership centers. These centers have proven essential in getting the word out about employee ownership and helping businesses to convert and getting more workers a voice in their workplace. We are proud to see that the Employee Ownership Initiative is already up and running at the Department of Labor. The next critical fight in making this program effective will be to ensure that we get the $4 million in grants that the program authorized and that they're actually funded in next year's budget. Senator Sanders is working hard to make this happen and welcomes your help in making this a priority for Congress during budget negotiations this year. I truly, please talk to me during this. I will happily talk to you at any time if you have stories to share. We can get your voices heard and included in this very, very important conversation. In addition to all of this, as Senator Sanders made clear to the Department of Labor last year, one of their top priorities in implementing the Secure 2.0 legislation should be to finally issue the adequate consideration regulation for employee stock ownership plans. The ESOP community has waited for far too long for the Department of Labor to issue these regulations, and it's about time that it happens. And finally, Senator Sanders believes that the promotion of employee ownership is absolutely critical, but we cannot just stop there. He plans to revive his proposal to create a U.S. employee ownership bank, which would provide $500 million in low-interest rate loans and other financial assistance to help workers purchase businesses through an employee stock ownership plan or a worker-owned cooperative. This legislation would be critical in dealing with the fact that many workers would like to turn their companies into an employee-owned business, but the private financing just is not there to make it happen. I'm sure many of you have stories and have experiences with exactly that. So I really appreciate the time that you've given me today to speak on Senator Sanders' behalf. He does regret not being able to be here today. For awareness, he's doing a bit of work right now on these double-digit rate increases for health insurance. So if you all have other stories to share on that piece, please touch base with me. I'm sure that there's nothing going on there. But I just greatly appreciate all the work that you all have been doing. Thank you so much. And I will pass it to my colleague, Fauna.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. I'm always so thrilled to be here and see this packed room. It's a really good sign for Vermont, and thank you to Matt and his team for organizing this great event. I am delighted to be speaking on behalf of Senator Welch. I serve as the Senator's business liaison and have enjoyed meeting many of you in this role over the past several years, and I look forward to meeting many more of you today. As Matt mentioned earlier, this year marks the 50th anniversary of the 1974 law that Congress passed, which created employee stock ownership plans, as we all call ESOPs. And since then, it has brought ownership of the enterprise to over 14 million Americans. Senator Welch is a proud ESOP champion in Congress, a distinction of the ESOP Association. He's focused on expanding more opportunities across rural Vermont and across rural America, and ESOPs can play a big role in that. As I travel around the state and meet with businesses, more and more owners are making succession plans, which presents an historic opportunity to extend the benefits of employee ownership to thousands more Vermonters and their communities in the coming years. This conference is a crucial opportunity for businesses to understand the various paths and options that work best and have questions answered by those who have walked those chosen paths. Vermont's businesses make up a tight-knit community, and I know you strive to take care of your employees. But the increasing cost of healthcare, driven significantly by the rising cost of prescription drugs, is a growing challenge and concern for many business owners, traditional or employee-owned. Senator Welch recently held a roundtable with business owners to hear how healthcare costs are impacting their ability to grow and succeed, and it's clear that these costs are a considerable challenge. Senator Welch has been working hard to rein in high prices for prescription drugs by supporting and expanding Medicare price negotiation, which is now underway. He is also working on the Judiciary Committee to reform the patent system and promote more competition in the manufacturing of generic and biosimilar prescription medications. In addition to working to rein in healthcare costs, Senator Welch is a co-sponsor of 2 bills that support ESOPs, one of which Matt mentioned earlier. S-2515, the Promotion and Expansion of Private Employee Ownership Act of 2023, which would eliminate barriers and make it easier for business owners to establish ESOP programs. And S-1618, the one that Matt mentioned earlier, the Employee Equity Investment Act of 2023, a bill that would help small and medium-sized businesses transition to employee ownership. As Matt, Ryan, and the VIOC team knows, our office is a resource for you, and we always welcome your ideas and input. The best ideas come from Vermont, and we always work to include the voices of Vermonters in the Senator's legislation. We applaud the hard work that VIOC has done to create, nurture, and mentor businesses to expand opportunities for employee ownership. In closing, Senator Welch extends his well wishes as you gather here today. We hope you build new relationships and make important decisions about your future companies and the future of your employees here in Vermont. That will create sustainable options for generations to come. Thank you all so much. And I'll pass it on to my colleague Jessica Nordhaus from the ballot team.
Thanks, Fauna. Thank you all for having us here. My name is Jessica Nordhaus, and I direct community outreach for Congresswoman Becca Balint. The Congresswoman is very pleased that we were invited here today. She knows the economic, social, and individual value of employee ownership and the impact, the far-reaching impact that it has. She was fortunate enough to, just this week, to meet with about 20 of the proud employee owners at Gardner's Supply at their manufacturing facility up in Fairfax, and enjoyed that visit very much. And she's also very proud of Vermont's leadership in this area, recognizes that it's important, that we're an important leader in the nation. One issue that's incredibly important to the Congresswoman is housing. You may have heard that she recently introduced the Community Housing Act, which would expand opportunities in a number of areas to build housing and get folks into housing. And I know as a business owner that that's also an incredibly important issue for you as well. She's focused on supporting Vermont's working families, and she knows the importance of supporting all Vermonters and how the pride of ownership and being invested in the work you do can help support your family. It can also increase mental health outcomes, another important area for her. Our office would love to hear from you, whether it's about policy that you're interested in, or all of our offices actually provide constituent services and constituent casework. So if you or any of your employees need help interfacing with a federal agency, we would welcome you to reach out to us, and we'll do our best to help you. Thanks. I hope you have a great conference.
Hello. I'm not Melissa Hoover, but I get to introduce her. She told me to be serious. That's all you get. She didn't really. So Melissa Hoover is one of my heroes. And I say that as a person who worked in a cooperative for 12 years. The Democracy at Work Institute started around the same time that Real Pickles was converting to be a cooperative. Real Pickles is down in Western Mass. And we looked to the Democracy at Work Institute for resources, for connection, for all of the things that you want in the employee ownership world. Currently, Melissa is the Director of Special Projects at Dowie, and in this capacity, she works closely with a partner called Apis and Heritage. They have a legacy fund that supports the creation of ownership culture in new 100% ESOPs. She's a leader in the worker development movement for 20 years, right? She's got a deep well of knowledge. She served as the founding executive director at Dowie from 2013 through mid-2023 and grew the organization from the ground up. Prior to that, she helped found the U.S. Federation of Worker-Owned Cooperatives, and she was also a cooperative business developer for several years with the Arizmendi Association of Cooperatives, supporting business planning, financial system setup, and training for 2 successful startups. She's a senior fellow at the Rutgers Institute for the Study of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing. She also serves as the strategic advisor to organizations of all types that want to incorporate worker ownership into their economic development and community wealth building programs. She currently sits on the board of directors of the ICA Group, Fund for Jobs Worth Owning, and Safe Passage of Oakland. She's originally also a Midwesterner like me, except she's from Kansas City, Missouri, and she attended Stanford University on a full scholarship, earning a BA in history with a research focus on immigrant women's roles building cooperative movements in the U.S. So please, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, welcome Melissa Hoover to the stage.
All right. Hello, Cleveland. Good morning. I'm nervous, so I'm going to take a big breath. I'm going to ask you all to take a big breath with me and appreciate our moment together today. So, okay, what a fun opportunity we have to spend today together. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit. First of all, I'll just say it's an honor to be here sharing some of my thoughts with people who have taught me so much. When I was invited to speak, I asked my coworkers and my clients and my colleagues what they would want to hear me talk about. Where's my water? And, they had all kinds of ideas, which was really inspiring. So, talk about secondary co-ops as a key to scale. Talk about how before the ESOP, I was in an abusive relationship with work. Ownership culture, okay, that's great, but how do you actually do it? Talk about that. And then my, really smart coworker, Vermont has a long history of employee ownership, so the question for them, make them answer a question, is what does a more employee-owned Vermont look like? And then last night at dinner, I asked Annie what she wanted me to talk about and what they wanted me to talk about, and they said, I want to know that it's possible. I want to know that it's possible to shift systems, to shift how we do things. So it's a tall order. I'm going to try and do a little of all of that, give you some context for the tools you're about to pick up today. And And I'm going to ask for your help first. So, the comedian Patton Oswalt, I was at a show recently where he said, every comedian needs a tagline, like Larry the Cable Guy has, like, get her done. And his tagline he was experimenting was like, put the puppy in the bucket. And I was like, I don't know if that works for my speech. But if you hear a tagline emerge for you, a put the puppy in the bucket moment, well, throughout the day, but especially during this morning's talk, please write it down, because I want to share those later. I never remember what I say, so it's always helpful to hear that reflected back. So I'm going to talk about some serious stuff, but first I'm going to tell you about the time I got fired from a really bad job. I was a scholarship kid in college. I had a single mom. I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I graduated, so the background on this is like, how do you get a job as a 22-year-old? It sounds like, a basic question, but I couldn't really answer it, which might have told you a little bit about where my head was at as a 22-year-old. So I went into the Career Center, and they asked me, what do you want to do? And some people luckily know what they want to do, right? They want to be an engineer, they want to be a teacher, they want to work with kids, they want to work with trees. I did not know. I had a vague ambition that I wanted to be a writer, and maybe I would just work to pay the bills while I wrote at night, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I did know how I wanted to do it, which was that I wanted to work with good people doing something hopefully meaningful in ways that didn't suck me dry, right? So the problem was that no one could help me find that. So I just got a bunch of jobs. I packed boxes in a warehouse. I took flower orders over the phone. By the way, 50% or more of flower notes are written by the person taking the order, just so you know. I worked a night shift in a plastics factory. I worked on the ecology bus driving around Southwest Minnesota teaching kids about nature. I was a secretary at a math department. I was, for all you parents of young adults, I was your worst nightmare, right? My parents were like, you went to Stanford? What are you doing? And I was like, I don't know, really. What am I doing? So then I got like a really cool job, like the coolest job for a 25-year-old in the year 2000. I was working with books and music, really very cool job. And I hated it. My coworkers were mean. They made it clear that I was in no way cool enough for this very cool job. There was lots of infighting, cutting people down. I was doing bookkeeping, which no one valued, as many of the bookkeepers in the room probably know, sort of underappreciated skill. And I was 25 and ready to fight the world about everything. So I was miserable. I did my work, but I was super fighty about it. I was very unpleasant to work with. I meddled, I gossiped, I, resisted at all chances. I came in early one morning to work. I was relieved. None of my coworkers were there. But it was like work time, so where were they? Like, I don't know, I'm just gonna do my work. It turns out they were having a secret meeting to fire me. So staff meeting started. My coworker said, we need to talk about something serious. In our whole history, we've never fired anyone. But we need to do something we've never done before. And I was worried, like, oh no, is Mary gonna get fired? No, Mary did not get fired. I got fired. And I was totally taken by surprise. Even though I was miserable, even though I was acting like a jerk, I was like, well, why? And they said, the guy doing the deed said, well, I don't like you. No one here likes you. And I had just served on a jury, so I polled the jury. I was like, really? Mary, you don't like me? No, I don't like you. Tony, you don't like me? No, I don't like you. Robin, you don't like, well, no, I don't like you. And then I was like, well, Jeff was my buddy. I had confided in him. We shared some frustrations. Jeff, you don't like me? And Jeff was like, took a minute. I wasn't at the meeting. So that's a terrible experience, right? It's everyone's worst fear, A, to lose your job, and B, for a whole room full of people to tell you that they don't like you. But in fact, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I reflected on it. The first thing, as I was licking my wounds and holding up for a little while, and I thought, the first lesson here is don't be a jerk at work. Like, that's pretty basic. We all have to be there. We want it to be good. Don't be a jerk at work. Like, clearly my fault. But the second thing is I got curious about why I was a jerk at work. I'm not generally a jerk. Clearly something had failed here. What was it? What were the conditions that had made me into the most toxic version of myself? And, I sort of can tick through it. We were really underpaid. There was no onboarding, almost no training. There was no positive feedback. There wasn't even any constructive feedback. No performance evaluations at all. There were unclear expectations and boundaries. We were sort of expected to work all the time for very little pay. There was no opportunity to really share suggestions and make changes. There were secret power hierarchies that weren't acknowledged but very much controlled everyone's day. None of us had any real understanding of our business model or how to contribute to it. And anytime I made a suggestion, I got shot down. So that's a recipe for a miserable work experience. It was lacking a lot. And to be fair, a lot of our workplaces are lacking some of these things. We're all making it up as we go. So that wasn't a good job. I wasn't a good employee. And I think now about all the energy I spent hating that and fighting it and ultimately sabotaging myself, all that wasted energy and how much that talent and skill could have been put to work and how much value could have been created under the right conditions. So, I needed a job. I got one as a bookkeeper in an employee-owned print company, offset printing, kind of a thing of the past. We still do offset printing, but not nearly as much. And I remember calling my mom after I got the job, and I was like, well, I got a job as a bookkeeper in a print company. And she was like, that's great, maybe you'll learn something. And I very clearly remember telling her, if I learn anything in this job, I am on the wrong track. Okay, fast forward 25 years later, every day I use everything I learned at that job, both the job skills in financial management, but also the deep employee ownership culture. So they did things differently. It was a mature business. They were bigger. They had rules and structures. They respected their workers. They taught me everything I know about financial management, job costing, manufacturing, and production. I taught myself Excel in order to get that job, and then I continued to learn. They gave me autonomy. There was a pathway for advancement. After a couple years, I got promoted to the management team. I was all in. And there were processes for grievances. There were ways to contribute ideas. But kind of as impressively, to me, the people working in that company also had lives outside of work. So my favorite salesman did community theater. He had like a one-man show that he performed. My lunch buddy was a seminary student. That business gave me Monday afternoons off to volunteer for an organization I really cared about. Their default setting was autonomy, having a process, being oriented towards the community, and seeing things in a win-win framework, not a zero-sum. So I started getting involved. I was like, this is a great place to work. How and why is it different? I came to conferences like this one. I began the bio that Annie read you, that everybody knows, but I think it's really important that the bio you don't know, the one that doesn't go on my resume, is actually what's driving me forward. And I think that's probably true for quite a few of us. So what I can see now is that I was looking for how to work as much as I was looking for what to work on. I think I've forgotten my slides. Sorry, we're at story time. So this is what I love about employee ownership. It forces you to think about these things explicitly, what's working and what's not working for all of us. So for the next 20 years, as I got more and more involved in employee ownership, I was like that Japanese video game, the Katamari, where you roll through the universe picking up trash and various objects. I was picking up experience and skills about how to work from the employee ownership world. I helped develop some worker-owned bakeries in the Bay Area. I helped start the Federation of Worker Co-ops, and then its splinter organization. I don't think we call it that. Its sister organization, the Democracy at Work Institute. And just more recently, I've helped start an investment fund to catalyze conversions to employee ownership. I really think the mindset and the settings overall of employee-owned companies are different. We know something very important that I think all people know, but we live it every day, which is that we know that collaboration, listening and seeking input, delegating out decision-making, that's not an inefficiency. That drives value in our companies. Yes, it makes better jobs for our employees, but it also makes better companies. We know that it's not business versus values, but values-driven businesses. It's not employee versus owner, but employee owners. And these things are not a bug, but a feature. They are our competitive advantage. So this is both confusing to other people and the source of our power. And so what I kind of want to say is lean in and insist on that intersection. Keep that win-win framing. I think the craziest lie we ever all believed was that these things are or have to be separate or opposed. And part of putting ourselves and our economy and our communities back together is to show a different way, and a way that insists that these things are united and that they are driving value for our companies and for our communities. I don't think that's idealism. I think it's practical, hardcore business logic. But it's logic that's to a pretty great degree contained within this room and other rooms like it. And I think our charge is to go out and make it a broader logic. So I actually think the logic of employee ownership might be our factory settings as humans. When your computer, you have to reset your computer to its factory settings, or your phone. So if you watch kids play, they know that engagement drives value. They're not going to talk to you about it like that, but they compete like crazy, right? But they also collaborate to have fun and to accomplish something. They make up rules, they give very strong and direct feedback to each other. They know that they can't do what they need to do if one party is totally dominated and demoralized. Kids do that. We call it bullying. And what was that about work as an abusive relationship earlier, right? So there are frameworks for how to be as humans, but I think if you look at us in our natural environment as young people, the play that we enact pulls together kind of all of the polarities of how we are and includes everyone in the play. So why and how do we lose those natural tendencies, that win-win approach? That if you're playing with me and we're all playing together, we're all winning. We go through life, more apps get added to our phone, we might download a virus, things slow down and get kind of junky. And sometimes to improve performance, you need to do a factory reset. And I think employee ownership is that factory reset. I think it takes us back to the fundamentals of who we are as cooperative animals to do economic activity in the world. So just an example of that, I was in a coffee shop downtown in my city in San Francisco, and there was a guy sitting there. It was a coffee shop and bar. He was having a beer, and I know he was talking about being a trash guy. And there's only really one trash guy in San Francisco, and that's Recology, which is an ESOP. And I butted in and said, hey, do you work for Recology? I'm sorry, that's a weird question. He said, yeah. And I said, can I ask you a question? And I know he was bracing himself no. But he said, yeah. And I said, what is it like to work there? Do you understand the ESOP? I'm trying to train people about ESOPs. Do you understand the ESOP? He said, yeah, it's okay. I don't know. I'm only going to have a couple $100,000 in my account when I retire. And then he said, and I'm not sure about the growth because I know it could dilute my share value. I know it's good for the company. I'm not supposed to be working today, but I jumped in because someone's out on my team and we have these goals to hit, but I know I'm going to get an extra day off next week. So I was like, whoa, this guy's factory settings are way different than most workers, right? I only have a couple $100,000 in my retirement account. I understand the business deeply enough to know that as it grows, it might dilute my share value, and I have thoughts and opinions about that. It was just a really powerful kind of demonstration right in the moment of this guy a couple beers in, happy to talk to me about his ESOP experience, but also sort of casual about it. So I'll switch gears a little bit. So I'm interested in our factory settings, right? And like what can help us be the most efficient and happy human animals we can be. And so 4 years ago, after kind of going through building a couple different organizations, not by myself, but in community with tons of other people, my organization, the Democracy at Work Institute, worked with one of our staffers and a partner of his to incubate the Legacy Fund, which is an investment fund that buys businesses and converts them to employee ownership. I loved bakeries, and I saw how they provided entry-level jobs for people back when I was a co-op developer, for people who were otherwise locked out of owning anything. And I wanted to work on explicitly bringing that shared ownership model to low-wage workers and workers of color who worked in essential industries. So landscaping, plumbing, manufacturing, home care, agriculture. I want to show you, for the last 40 years, wages have not kept up with productivity, and like that's a little bit of an understatement. Productivity has gone wild. We have a deeply productive economy, and wages have stayed flat. So what's happening? Oh, whoops. What's happening in the middle there? Productivity is going up, wages are staying flat. A whole lot of surplus is being generated. And where is it going? It's concentrating in the hands of fewer and fewer people. All that surplus is going somewhere, but it's not going to the people who are generating it. Those people, not only are they not keeping pace with productivity, they're staying flat, and it's creating this massive gulf in our economy. So ownership's consolidating, jobs are getting worse, they're more insecure, they're lower paid, they're not keeping up with inflation, et cetera. Can we use employee ownership to do something about that, was our question. It's a powerful tool. So we raised an investment fund. It's sort of private equity for good, although I'm very careful to say it's not private equity. But it does take a heavy hand in the companies that we invest in terms of creating an ownership culture. We use what we call an elbow model, employee-led buyout, where my partners basically buy out the selling owners, and then we work with a local bank to put in an ESOP. And then they partner with me, with my organization, to help the company develop a strong ownership culture. So the idea is that's going to supercharge productivity, it'll protect the investment, but it'll also deliver real value to the employee owners and set the company up for success going forward. We work with the companies for about 5 years on developing an ownership culture, which is really like the blink of an eye in ownership culture timeline. We think we can use employee ownership to build what we call high-value jobs for people whose jobs have traditionally not been valued very much at all. What's a high-value job? Well, it's got better job quality, higher satisfaction, better safety, good working conditions. It builds wealth. So there's really an opportunity through both wages and employee ownership participation to build wealth, and it makes you healthier. It invests in your health as a human being. So far, we raised $60 million, my colleagues raised $60 million over Zoom during the pandemic to launch this investment fund. We have implemented employee ownership in 4 companies. We have a ton of impact metrics that we track, but basically in the first year, what you can see down here at the bottom is after only 1 year of employee ownership in the first 2 companies, there was $250,000 in employees' accounts. That's the lowest they'll ever be, knock on wood, no forward-looking statements, et cetera. But they are building wealth immediately. Those companies became 100% employee-owned at the close of the deal. And then we're investing in, there are several hundred workers at this point. We're investing in training, education, coaching, a whole ownership culture plan. In the first year, job satisfaction across the portfolio is up 12%. And this is self-reported we do an anonymous survey of workers. And employee well-being is up 3%. ESOP understanding is still coming along because it takes quite a while to understand your ESOP. So I think there's something important to say. sometimes we get a little lazy in our framing and we say, ESOPs create better jobs. ESOPs build wealth. ESOPs do build wealth on their own without really much else. But it's not ESOPs alone that create good jobs. It's ESOPs plus a high engagement culture. This is what the research shows over and over again. So we do education about the ESOP. That's the cornerstone of everything. But really what we try to do is make it feel different to work in portfolio companies. So we take a three-part approach. First, people have to understand the ESOP, and this is true for cooperatives as well. If you don't understand it, you can't engage with it. Second, we pay attention to real rewards. So that's the member account, the ESOP the participant account, but it's also making sure wages have parity with existing companies in that industry and that there are good benefits and all of that good stuff. And then third, we focus on effective input. So we have workers sit on the board of our companies. We build structures for creating input. But I would say these are the shallowest level of what we do. There's really these are the tip of the iceberg. There's so much below that. So with ESOP understanding, it's not understanding what an ESOP is. It's understanding your role in creating value for the company, your role as an employee and how the company makes money. On real rewards, it's yes, your member account, but it is also your wages, benefits, and working conditions that meet your needs as an employee. And then for effective input, yes, it's structures, but structures don't mean anything if people don't know how to use them. So it's skills and systems for management and for employees that support people to give real input that's meaningful. So this is our approach. It looks really good on a slide. It's real messy in real life, like most things. I think that the key thing to understand about what we're doing is we're doing this with workforces that may not speak English, that may not speak English as a first language, may not speak English at all. They may not read well in any language. They have no lived experience of anyone caring about them at all in their industries for their entire career. Now, that's not everybody, but it sure is a lot of them. So trust is low. They're afraid for their jobs. The ESOP went in, their first thought, when am I going to get fired? And they don't see themselves as agents within their companies. No one has ever asked them what they thought or how to improve their job or how to improve their company. So it's a challenge. It's a pretty heavy lift. We have to translate a lot of existing materials. And I'm learning from my peers and from the experts in the room. I want to thank publicly Karis Reels, Gardner Supply, Praxis Consulting, and Jen Briggs, and others that I'm sure I'm forgetting, for sharing how you do it on the daily in your companies. You probably can't see this very well. This is just an example of sort of a framework that Jen Briggs offered me. She's from Great Consulting now. That's sort of like, here's how we think about, there's financial literacy, business literacy, spirit of inquiry. Those lead to participation and influence, and then we end at open book management. These kinds of things are incredibly helpful as you're, trying to build out a culture. So you're here because you want to make ownership matter at your company. So I'll share what we've learned so far about how to make ownership matter at the companies that we work in. First, I would say the realities of the work matter. And in all the companies we work in, people are doing physical work. They are not in the office. They don't have an email. So is it a factory or is it a service? Is it a nursery? Are they off-site? Are they in the facility? We have to design for all of those realities. Some people never come into the office. There are time and production pressures in low-margin industries. Every hour that you're training someone is an hour that business is not making money, and the business may run pretty close to the bone. So what do you do about that? How do you create a win-win situation out of, I'm not making money right now? These are really, really challenging things. For us, we sort of start with purpose as meaning. And I think this is incredibly true for low-wage work, but probably true for everybody. So in our framework, all jobs have a high value. So when the ecology guy was like, I'm just a trash man, that's a high-value job. It's a job that keeps us safe and healthy. That's the purpose of that job. So his everyday reality might be that he's out on the truck, he's dumping things, it's a dirty job. Our societal reality is that that keeps us safe and healthy. It keeps our neighborhoods clean. So we think about what is the core purpose of this work. So landscaping's purpose is not to plant plants, it's to make the world beautiful. Builder's purpose is to shelter us so that we can be in spaces like this. A plumber's purpose is to keep us healthy. A caregiver's purpose is to help us be born, help us grow, and help us die. These are really fundamental purposes. And when you frame a job like that, it means something, and it lays a groundwork for a high-value job. I'll show you sort of a bizarre corruption of this, which is, you remember the Subway sandwich artist? So they're trying to do that. So probably met with a consultant who was like, give the job purpose and meaning. It's not just making sandwiches. So they came up with sandwich artist. But the problem with that is that's not actually, no, like, it's not, like art might be the wrong metaphor there, right? Like the purpose of this is not self-expression. The purpose is to feed you. If they had aligned purpose with activity, then we might like really feel the, understand kind of the importance and the value of that job. So that's our first lesson, is align with purpose. Our second lesson is believing in people is powerful, like especially people who have not been believed in before. So if I walk into a room with my belief, my full-throated belief that we are going to build this company together and build an ownership culture together, it really makes a difference. But what's just as powerful is the data that it's happening. So this sort of double whammy of belief and data. We do surveys, we measure things, we measure what matters to us and reflect it back to the companies. And when they see themselves on that chart or those results, that makes the belief real. Third thing we've learned, and it's not really, I'm gonna just acknowledge Michael Quarry at Web Industries. He said this to me over and over, and I didn't learn it until I had it, until I was on site in the companies. Employee engagement doesn't happen because you allow it. It happens because you require it and you reward it. So a suggestion box, get rid of it. Have a party where you collectively destroy that suggestion box. Do the Office Space thing like they did with the fax machine. Instead replace it with a system where you require participation and you reward that participation. And then some tactical stuff that you'll cover in workshops, keep it simple and bite-sized. Design for the person who understands the least, because everybody will benefit from that. Give people the chance to mess up, to fail. Having a play framework, like Kids on the Playground, actually helps support that. And stay in it for the long haul. This takes a long time, 2 years in with the companies, and I feel like we haven't done anything in terms of building that culture yet. So culture is, the sum total of all the things you take for granted. It's the air you're breathing, the water you're swimming in. You don't know you're in it. I would argue that it's the factory settings, right? And we want to restore the factory settings. How am I doing on time? Okay, I need to speed up here. So just zooming out for a broader view. So that's what I've been working on. I think we're at a moment right now for employee ownership. You heard a lot about the policy changes from the legislative staff and from Matt. This is new. That's all really new in the last few years. ESOPs are having their 50th anniversary of ERISA, the law that created ESOPs. Corey Rosen at the NCEO conference earlier this month talked about how ESOPs were originally envisioned as a means for growth capital, for companies to acquire growth capital and then share the benefits of that. But what we're actually seeing is a shift toward ESOPs being used as a succession strategy for owners who are leaving. So there are more and more 100% S-Corp ESOPs and smaller businesses. ESOPs are growing as a community through mergers and acquisitions, part of a workshop I'll be part of later this afternoon, shameless plug. And there's a growing interest in using financial equity for social equity in the employee ownership world that I think is pretty exciting. Worker co-ops are also growing. They're growing as a community through succession. They're building ecosystems and infrastructures of support. And there's been a real shift in the time that I've been involved in this work from people using worker co-ops to exit the economy, people with options who decide they want to do it differently, to people with fewer options using worker co-ops to enter the economy. So it's to unlock the opportunity that allows them to succeed. And then at the same time, there are a bunch of other models, employee-owned trusts. You may have heard about private equity now sharing an equity stake in the company that gets cashed out when they sell. I think those things are something to keep an eye on. Those are mainstream enactments of employee ownership. They're scale-oriented. They have some downsides, and I think they solve for some things. So it's complicated. We should have a discussion about it. I think a lot about my brother's work. I don't know if I can actually play this, so I'll just act it out on stage for you. So my brother was an engineer who studied insects to see how we could learn from them to design better systems, better machines, basically. So he studied cockroach locomotion. He literally put a cockroach on a treadmill and took a video of it. And so you can do the cockroach on the treadmill, and then he would run them up walls. Well, they'll run themselves up walls. And if you slow it down like 100 times, so what you see when a cockroach runs up a wall is, shoo, right, very fast. What actually happens at 100 times slower is it bangs its head against the wall several times, and it readjusts, it calculates its angle, and then it goes up the wall. And it's like in a microsecond, it's very fast. And I think about that for us because what is one of the most resilient species on Earth? What's going to be here after the apocalypse? It's going to be cockroaches. They figured something out. And I think we might be at the cockroach moment of just having gotten past the last bang of our head on the wall. We might be ready to go up the wall now. So just keep that in mind as we're going forward. I think Vermont is a laboratory, really punches above its weight in sort of density of employee-owned businesses, but I think particularly in its infrastructure, so policy, advocates, service providers, and companies themselves. There's so much talent and skill and wisdom inside your companies, and you're sharing it with each other and you're sharing it with the world. I think it's so critically important to have these state centers pulling people together to share and learn. You have something very special here. You may not know it, but you really do. So treasure it, help it grow, help it pay its bills, fund it, support it, participate in that ownership center and the culture around it. My colleague was like, well, Vermont's neighbor to the north has close to 100 years of ecosystem building and significant market share in priority industries and financial institutions. And it also has a deep nationalistic identity, like a lot of places where employee ownership has thrived, because in part there's a sort of local pride that broadly held ownership can anchor, as opposed to the sort of borderless corporate model that is predominant. So how does Vermont define itself? What does he say? Their motto is freedom and unity. How might these touchstones serve as a call to action for the state? I'll leave that for you to answer. I'm from the California part of Vermont. But what I really want to say is this conference is a laboratory. So, so you are a mad scientist, right, today in this laboratory. Experiment, try stuff out. You are returning, you might be a Katamari trash ball going through the universe of this conference gathering wisdom. You are returning to the factory settings. And maybe you're a cockroach. Most of this is not taught in business schools, what you're going to learn today. So you're going to business school right now. You're teaching in business school right now. Ownership culture, how do you actually do it? That was one of the charges. Well, you just do it. you gather what you can and you get it started. You are an agent in your company, in your community. Probably several of you are first-timers at this and you're new to this. You are part of what's going to change in your company and in your community and at home. So, to Andy's question, is it possible to shift systems? I would say ask the cockroach. Be the cockroach. Hopefully this gives you a very powerful framework for the day. I'll end with what my mentor, Joseph Blasi at Rutgers, says. At every conference, he says, everyone here wants to hear what you have to say, which I think is a really lovely thought and also true. So now, go forth and say it. Thank you very much.